Hello and welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day. My name is Amber Hines. I am one of the lead organizers for the event, and I'm really excited to introduce you all to our keynote speaker today, Nicholas Steenhout. Nick has been a developer since the mid-90s and was approached at that point in time by clients facing issues that were not yet part of the public consciousness. And in that early time, accessibility hurdles were really keeping people with disabilities from engaging with the technical revolution. And that is what motivated him to get involved with website accessibility. So he transitioned into the nonprofit sector where he collaborated with people in a wide variety of impairments and was introduced to new assistive technologies. And now, 25 years later, Nick is working as an independent consultant both for private and nonprofit businesses and organizations. And he is a blogger, a podcaster, and a public speaker. And we are very excited to have him here today for his keynote, Open Source and Accessibility, Do It With Us, Not For Us.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for the intro, Amber. I am Nick Steenhout, and I'm so super excited to open the WordPress Accessibility Day 2022. It's so awesome to see events related to WordPress talking and educating about accessibility because, well, WordPress is big. We all know that. The other big thing is the number of disabled people in the world. I'll talk about the numbers game in a bit, but first, a little bit more about me that Amber was saying. I've been working in digital accessibility one way or other for a very long time. I remember when the alt attribute was introduced to HTML. Trivia time. This was in 1993, so it's quite a while back. When I was doing websites, I was not really thinking about accessibility at the time, but I had a bit of a aha moment, and it came in three moments. The first one was talking to a colleague. He was blind, and he came into my office one day. He was so frustrated. He says, Nick, this website, the only thing I hear is image, 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 image. And then I looked at the site and I realized what we were doing at the time, because CSS was not a thing. To have really nice fonts, we would take image of text and cut them out and then present that as our menu or as our main text even. But we didn't put in alt text. And suddenly I realized, oh, this is a problem for someone who's blind using a screen reader. It looks good, but it's basically non-existent for assistive technologies. The second moment, about 2 weeks later, was a deaf colleague. And she came into my office and she said, Nick, I can't install this printer because the instructions are on a CD with a video, no text, and no captions. So I had to help setting up the printer because the instructions were not in an accessible format. And then the third time, within, again, just a few more weeks later, was one of our consumer came in and she says, I would love to be able to use the web, but everything is distracting me. All the colors, all the blinking things, the text moving, the large font, the underline, everything is so distracting that I can't use it. So I started looking, how do we do this? And I created basically a CSS reset before that was a thing for this person with ADHD. So these three events, one after the other, really cemented the importance of digital accessibility. As a wheelchair user, I was already aware of how important physical accessibility was. And these three people really brought it home to me. These days, I mostly provide consultation for large companies. They aim to improve their products' accessibility, but I've also done a lot of work around Open source, including using WordPress as a developer and as an end user. I've been on the W3C Accessibility Initiative, the Education and Outreach Working Group. I've worked with and on open source applications for a long time. And now I prefer to provide accessibility training. I speak about disability, inclusion, and obviously accessibility at tech events like this one. Though today my presentation is not a tech talk, because accessibility is not about tech. It's about people. And that's my main motive today, my main message. And that's what I'm going to talk about. First, though, I want to do some housekeeping. You can grab the slides. They're online from bit.ly/A11Y-DAY-WP. So you can follow along if you want that way. These slides are going to stay up after the presentation, so there's no rush to get there. Then I need to let you know, my slides are mostly just there to give you something to look at if you want. I'm not going to read my slides, but I will speak to everything that's on them. So you're not missing anything by me not reading the slides. Most of the images on the slides, they're just eye candy. And I'll make sure to describe the images that really matter. Finally, this is not just me talking at you. Obviously, it's hard in a keynote format to have a dialogue, but I really do want to have a dialogue with you. So at the end of the talk, let's have that. Take notes during my presentation and bring up any perspective you want to bring up, because this is not going to happen without a collective agreement, without collective effort, and that's just not going to happen without dialogue. So keep that in mind. At the end, we're hopefully going to have a bit of a really good dialogue. So there's so many ways free open source software, FOSS, OS, open source software has changed the world. For example, most of the world's supercomputer, they run Linux. The cloud runs Linux. Android is, well, technically at least, open source. The list goes on. I'm not going to talk about all these things, but the thing is, open source has been beneficial for individual as well. For example, having your own presence on the web is so much easier for people when you use open source software like WordPress or many other content management systems. This has been super important for so many people. But open source software has problems. It has problems in a lot of ways that I'm not going to explore, but it has a big problem in relation to what I'm talking about is disability and accessibility and inclusion. FOSS projects really reflect society in many ways. As a result, we have systemic ableism in place, and I'm hoping this talk will help you confront that reality. I'm hoping to give you some ideas on how you can make changes. By attending this conference, I'm pretty sure you're already interested, so let's talk about numbers. One of the questions that I'm often asked by client or by open source project folks is, how many disabled people are there? I think the real question they want to ask is more like, well, is it worth it for us to spend time and resources on accessibility? And I tell them I don't like to play the numbers game. I don't like that game because it's not about numbers. But if we really want to play the numbers game, okay, let's ask this. What's the oldest browser you support? And what's the percentage of visits you get from that browser? I'm willing to bet that that number will be smaller than the hard number of disabled people we can get from census data. There's anywhere between 15% and 26% of people that have a disability, depending on the data you're looking at. That's a significant difference from 15 to 26. But let's say, in our context, not everyone who is counted as disabled has barriers on the web. So we have to remove some of those numbers. You have to shave off folks that don't experience barriers on the web. But then to that number, you have to add folks that have temporary impairments, like me when I broke both my wrists. So that wasn't counted in census data. Or maybe people that have brain fog from long COVID. That's a thing, right? It's a very important thing that's coming to our consciousness as developers. Or maybe they're fighting tiredness after a big lunch. Or maybe they got stung by a bee in the face and they can't see from one eye. There's any number of reasons why people without permanent disabilities, permanent impairments, will need accessibility. So, we're evening out that number, 15 to 26%, plus a whole bunch of numbers. And then you also have to add all these peoples who have disabled loved ones and the able-bodied allies and accomplices. These people who care about accessibility and who will make a decision about your product, your service, your website, based on how accessible it is for their loved ones. The numbers game is rather nebulous. There's no clear answers beyond the numbers don't matter. If you don't want to exclude people, these numbers are pointless. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you exclude one person, 100 people, or even 100,000 people. A community that excludes even one of its community member is no community at all. That's a message I was pushing hard when I started getting involved in open source. I became active on the Mambo CMS forum. Mambo was one of the first content management systems I used, and I was super vocal about accessibility on the Mambo user forums. Those of you who know me know that that's what I do. If I see a problem, I speak out. If I see something's well done, I also speak out. But for several months, I was really active there and talking about accessibility in the forums, helping people out with the forums. And then the entire core team decided to fork the project. They didn't like what was happening with Mambo. They thought it wasn't open enough. So they forked the project and they formed what we now know as Joomla. I realize we have someone talking about Joomla and accessibility later today. I'm super excited for that because I want to see where it's at now. Because when Joomla began, they asked me to come on board and help make Joomla accessible. Of course, I jumped at the chance. Hey, I was getting involved in the forums and I was a bit frustrated to not see things really happen. So I became involved, and my experience was not as great as I was hoping at the time. I was able to get a number of small improvements included, but after 18 months or so, I quit the team. Accessibility at the time was going nowhere, and I was done hitting my head against a brick wall. It was very difficult, and there was so much work. The admin interface, that needed to be completely redone in a way that was accessible, but that was just way too big of an idea. Let's face it, we had too much work to just make the front end accessible, forget the back end. So I spent a lot of time to refactor the code as a proof of concept as to what we could do to make sites render WCAG conformant front ends, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. At the time, we were working on version 1 of the guidelines. My changes were not included. I spent quite a bit of time refactoring the entire code base, and they just weren't included. In fact, some core team members started saying things like, hey, why don't we leave accessibility to third-party plugins? At the time, one line of code, overlay solutions, which I'll talk about later, these didn't exist. So the suggestion was literally the idea of someone building an add-on to override the non-accessible aspects of Joomla. Uh, the team all believed that accessibility was important. There's no doubt about that. But there was a strong stench of, not our job. And that was the end for me. It reflected how little the team actually understood the importance of accessibility. Even though I'd been educating and advocating for a year and a half and all the previous time on the Mambo forum, it took a while to get to that point. Now, jumping to a different topic from content management system to learning management system. A couple years ago, I was looking for an accessible LMS. I reached out to the top 50 learning management system providers out there. It took some digging, it took some time, but I created a list of the most likely top 50 LMS providers. Some were open source, some were commercial. The commercial offerings were almost amusing. They were mostly frustrating, but it was so frustrating, it was quite amusing. For example, one of them quoted me a cost of nearly 50,000 US dollars just for 1 year. And they said, we have a near 100% conformance to WCAG 1.2 AA. Yes, they were promising WCAG 1.2. I queried and they confirmed. The thing is, for those of you that aren't familiar with the accessibility guidelines, there never was a WCAG 1.2. We had WCAG 1 for nearly 10 years. Then we got WCAG 2. Okay, then. Next. Went on to the next provider that was saying that they were accessible. They were very expensive. And when I asked them to give me some very specific information about how accessible they were and maybe provide a VPAT, they told me that information about accessibility was commercially sensitive and they weren't going to share it with me. So they say they're accessible, but the actual level of accessibility is a commercial secret. That really did not work for me. So that led me, of course, to have another look at open source offerings. There was Moodle. Moodle is known everywhere as first open source LMS to offer accessibility. It's a bear to work with for admins, and the last time I had a good look, it really was so server intensive, it just was an option for this client. Then we have OpenEDX, which seems to also be a bear, and it requires knowledge of the platform to use, and the documentation, at least at the time I was looking, was seriously lacking. So it really wasn't an option. We had to look at hiring an OpenEDX specialist, which wasn't really the idea. So eventually, we settled on WordPress, a WordPress solution with WooCommerce and Sensei LMS. Only it wasn't accessible out of the box, but never fear, it's open source, so we could fix it. So I started hacking the files to make it accessible. And I was looking on the Sensei developer forums, and there was discussion to go from what they were doing to using the WordPress blog system. Of course, it makes sense to use the blog system because that's the direction WordPress was taking. But I gave up. I gave up in trying to hack and remediate and fix Sensei, because by the time I'd have finished refactoring Sensei to work accessibly, it would be a completely different system, and all the work I would have done would have to have been done all over again. Unless, of course, everything would have been put into Sensei, but that's a whole different level of work. It really means also one of the problems I have with open source, which is often individuals like you and I are putting a lot of time and a lot of work in making a product better that is a commercial product. So it's making a profit for other people than the ones that are putting the hard work in. And while I've done that for a long time, I've come to realize this is not me. But I digress. This is a different thing. So anyway, the developers were open to integrating my changes, but the feeling I got was that it was going to be me against the world. I would have to justify every single change. Why do we make this happen? And maybe it was going to be included, maybe not. And why should I bother? Really? I had better things to do with my time than to spend hours and days and possibly weeks fixing accessibility of an open source project for commercial goals. So, of course, my prior experience with Joomla really soured me on the idea. That said, the rest of my presentation, I'm really going to push the idea of disabled people getting involved. So keep that idea of my frustration and my reluctance to involve myself in open source development so much these days. Keep that on the side because it's not so important. I forgot my slide about learning management system. So there you go. So it's a good time to bring up ableism. What's ableism? It's something you may have heard about. There's many ways to define that. And a simple definition I really like goes like this. Ableism is discrimination or prejudice against disabled people, intentional or not. We're talking prejudice and bias and outright discrimination. We're talking about actions and we're talking about language. We're talking about policies. Ableism can be active or passive. Some things you do are ableist. Not doing some other things is also ableist. And we don't have to look far to find example of ableism. For example, I was speaking at a conference just before the pandemic, and the chief technical officer of a company was surprised to hear that blind people use computers. They said, "Oh, you're saying that's why alt text matters." But then they also dismissed the need for it on their platform. They said, "We don't have any blind people coming here from our website because, well, they don't use it." Of course, as I said earlier, we don't really have metrics about how many disabled people actually use our website. So ableism is also a company thinking the information about their product's accessibility is sensitive commercial information, and then not sharing it with clients. Ableism goes into the language. When was the last time you heard someone say, "That's crazy"? By using the word crazy to denote a negative aspect. And because that word is so closely associated with mental illnesses, when the expression is used, the implication is that mental illnesses are negative, even if the person using that expression did not mean it that way. Because the intent, in most cases, isn't anywhere near as important as to how it's received. And let's face it, hearing ableist language isn't anywhere near as problematic as being unable to see your doctor because their booking website isn't accessible. But if you experience ableism, even the small stuff, if you experience that often enough, it becomes difficult. A friend recently compared it to a death by 1,000 cuts. Each time is a microaggression, and each experience builds upon the next and the previous one, and it becomes this super uncomfortable experience. It's not nice. And maybe you'll say, "Okay, so that's nice, but what's that got to do with WordPress?" Right? Well, ableism is often ingrained in each of us because the society we live in, we are our projects. We reflect our organization and we influence our work. And it takes a lot of work to go beyond ableism. Ableism is systemic, and our projects are system, our organizations are system. And unless we systematically go through our policies, our practice, our workflows, we will continue to have ableism influence our actions, whether we know it or not. Ableism is a societal problem. Ableism is a human problem. And accessibility is a solution to a human problem. Now, take note, I'm not saying that disabled people cause problems. That's not at all what I'm saying. But we disable our users. We use tech in ways that cause problems for disabled folks. What we should be doing instead is using tech to eliminate barriers for disabled humans. We can't keep thinking of accessibility as a tech issue. The tech is the tool, no more, no less. We work in tech, or at least those of you attending this conference has a strong interest in using tech to create stuff. Let's use the tools to provide accessibility, to improve access. Fixing bad markup is the result of accessibility work. Yep. Markup being bad is not the reason we need to fix bad markup. It's not the sole reason to do that. We need to fix it because of the barriers we created for people when we have bad markup. And maybe that's a deceptively simple idea. Because it goes to a complete paradigm shift, I'm asking you to go from, well, we're going to change this thing because we need to make it better, to we're going to completely change our thinking about accessibility in our project. And from there, it's going to get things easier to fix. I'm going to ask you to create a culture of accessibility that accounts for and aims to eliminate ableism. Now, I'm going to take you back to my Joomla days for a moment because it ties in with the idea of a culture of accessibility. And the slide I have here, for those of you who can't see it, I think is really, really quite good, if I may say so. It's a dance troupe. There's 4 people on the stage. There's 2 men and 2 women. One of the women is a power wheelchair user, and there's a struggle between the woman in the wheelchair and a man who's pushing against her hand. The whole thing is very fluid, very dynamic, and to me, it's really this representation of a fight of disabled people trying to get included, trying to be part of society. And yeah, I just really like that image, that dance. But anyway, culture of accessibility. I realized what I'd failed to implement when I was at Joomla was a culture of accessibility. You see, I realized in retrospect, I had approached things the wrong way. I had approached things in terms of, let's fix code. I advocated for specific changes in the interface. And sure, I spoke about disabled folks and how we use the web, but I didn't lead with that. I didn't try and change the culture first. I don't know that I would have succeeded if I had approached it that way. But my thinking these days is that once the culture of accessibility is solid, changing code or changing design practices is a relatively mundane thing. It's mundane because people know how important accessibility is. And there are resources targeting accessibility. And teams integrate thinking about accessibility from the start. Accessibility becomes a matter of fact rather than a big ordeal that takes a long time and costs a lot of money. Designers start to think about their design in ways that is accessible. They don't even have to really think about it. They don't have to say, oh, is this going to comply with WCAG? No, because they've built that muscle, that design muscle that integrates their understanding of accessibility. It's the same thing for developers. Developers don't have to think, oh, is what I'm doing going to be accessible? Because they've built that muscle memory, that understanding, just like they know JavaScript or they know PHP or they know HTML. Hopefully, they know HTML. Just like they know their programming language, accessibility becomes an aspect, a skill, part of their skill set. Same thing with QA. QA people, they don't just run automated testing. They understand that they have to do manual testing and functional testing, and they can't rely just on automated testing. All that good stuff that all these people like me doing accessibility consulting, advocating for accessibility, all these things we've been pushing for, it all flows from a culture of accessibility. Once we have that, then we don't have all these problems. Now, you may have heard this analogy. Accessibility is like a blueberry muffin. If you try to stuff the blueberries in the muffin after they're baked, well, it's going to make a mess and it's going to fail. But if you put the berries in the batter before you bake them, it takes no time and the results are good at no extra cost. And that's where a culture of accessibility helps. We become better at adding the ingredients in the recipe at the correct time, and we don't have to think about it so much. Culture of accessibility also leads me to say something, maybe quite controversial. Accessibility is good for everyone. Yep, I said, I stand by it. It's actually controversial because in some sector of the disability communities, some advocates are saying that it erases the disability experience. For example, they claim that by suggesting plain language benefit non-native speakers, we erase the need of folks with cognitive impairments. For example, your website is in English, and I'm going to tell you, well, if you use plain language, Chinese visitors, Spanish visitors, French visitors are going to have an easier time understanding your site. Well, by making that argument, some advocates are saying we erase the need of folks with cognitive impairments. If I use an example from the built environment, they're saying that suggesting curb cuts are good for parents with strollers erases the experience of wheelchair users. I was a wheelchair user myself. I don't get it. I'm erased a lot less by having a curb cut that I can use, even if it's been added to help parents with strollers or definitely folks with dollies or kids on skateboards. I'm erased a lot more than if there's no curb cut at all. So for me, I'm going to use every tool in the arsenal, and I am going to say accessibility is good for everyone. And I am going to say having a culture of accessibility really includes that, because we're talking about inclusion. We're talking about everybody. But of course, we have to keep disability at the forefront of our mind. Absolutely. That's the primary aspect of digital accessibility work. But frankly, I will be happy if the end result is a platform or a website or an app that's accessible. So what if the decision makers needed to realize that good contrast is important for folks using their app on a cell phone in full sun? Because my friends with low vision, well, they'll be able to use the site when the contrast is good. So the thing is, this goes hand in hand with having a solid culture of accessibility, doesn't it? Margaret Staples, a developer advocate, said during her keynote at Midwest PHP a few years ago that your community is you. Open source software is often community-based, and a lot of projects rely on the community to get things done. And that's both wonderful and really demanding of you, demanding of your time, your energy, your resources. It's important to realize that you have a chance to start making this change towards an organizational culture of accessibility. You have the power because you are the community. Okay, so maybe your power will be limited until the culture is changed. But every little bit helps. You have to shift that paradigm. And as I say that, I'm well aware that we have decisions to make. I chose not to get involved with remediating Sensei LMS. We can't fix all the things all the time, but we can start on little things. We can pick the projects that are really important to us. And in those projects, we need accessibility champions. That's what really open source projects needs are accessibility champions. And what do I mean by an accessibility champion? Well, to me, an accessibility champion is someone who's got an interest in making things more accessible. It's someone who has at least a basic understanding of accessibility. And it's also someone who's okay with being the squeaky wheel. Someone who will raise their hand and say, hey, what about accessibility? Obviously, we need a few experts. The experts are going to be there with understanding the technical challenges. The experts are going to provide solutions. But champions, well, champions might not know the subtle differences between how VoiceOver renders something compares to JAWS. And they might not be able to tell if those differences are even actually important. But champions will know that it's important to ensure something works for screen reader users. And then self-aware champions will also know where their knowledge ends and is getting stretched, and when it's time to call in experts. Every team should have at least one accessibility champion on board. And if you don't have that, as a team leader, find someone that's interested, find someone who has an interest. There's, going back to the numbers game, there's probably 1 in 4 disabled people in the world. That means that maybe someone has a disability you don't know, you haven't seen. Maybe you don't want to ask that because you don't want to force people to disclose, obviously. But maybe if you put it out there and you have a team and you say, okay, we have a team, we don't have a champion that's really versed in accessibility, that's taking that to heart. Who wants to be it? That's what you can do if you're not that person who wants to be an accessibility champion. Although if you're sitting on this conference today, you probably are the accessibility champion for your team, and that's not a problem for you to have at this point. Going back one slide because I'm going ahead of myself. Lack of champion on teams can lead organization thinking that accessibility overlays are a good solution to accessibility. Chances are, if you're attending today's conference, you know better than that, but maybe not. Because I'm seeing accessibility overlays coming into the WordPress ecosystem. I've heard a lot of people talk about these solutions, and I really should point out that the plugin repository maintainers don't have a lot of control over that. So by overlays, I mean plugins that typically use AI to supposedly fix accessibility on a site. Either you install a plugin on your site or you add one line of code that calls a bunch of JavaScript. Then you supposedly get all your accessibility problems solved. And as a bonus, you give the appearance of giving disabled user choice as to how they will be interacting with your site through a nifty little widget. Some of the overlays I've heard about recently include Hive or Pojo. And even better, when I Googled WordPress Accessibility Day this morning, the first 2 results, sponsored results, were for overlay companies. I won't name them because they're quick to call in their lawyers when they think someone talks badly about them, but there's others. So these overlays present themselves as user options, but they typically conflict with actual user assistive technology. Why should you need to optimize a site for keyboard-only users by using a widget when you can build a site that works well out of the box? That kind of stuff. I'm going to be clear here. I have to say this because I believe firmly in it. One line of code, automated accessibility fixes are not ready for prime time. Maybe they'll never be ready. So anyway, there you have it. If you're on a team on a project that is considering using an overlay or an accessibility widget, you can do a lot of good by saying, nope, let's not do that. Anyway, disabled people are the obvious accessibility champion. And on this slide, I have a photo of the late Stella Young, a wonderful accessibility advocate who did a great talk at TEDx about inspiration porn. And if you don't know that, I encourage you to go look it up because it's great. I was glad to see there's many disabled presenters, organizers today at this conference. Maybe not all disabilities are visible, but obviously disabled folks have a keen interest in things being accessible. And disabled people are often called on to be accessibility champion. But we can get tired, worn out, frustrated, burned out. Think about my Joomla experience. Let's face it, also, sometimes we want to do stuff that's not directly related to accessibility. And too many projects expect disabled people to help with accessibility. I had a developer once tweet, hey, are there blind screen reader users that want to help with my project? There was no money in it. There was nothing other than, I'm going to use your time to tell me if my site works or not without having done the background. So too few projects are willing to pay disabled people for their time. And by pay, I don't just mean money. I'm talking about pay with respect, pay with actual changes, pay with listening to us. Now, accessibility champions shouldn't just be disabled people on projects. Yes, we want to be involved when the circumstances are right, but we're not enough of us to go around. We have a lot of people that are disabled, but there's not of us to go and participate in all these projects. Beyond champions, we need allies. I know many non-disabled folks working in accessibility, good folks, allies, accomplices, champions, and experts. So to those non-disabled folks watching the presentation, thank you. Thank you for being interested in accessibility. Thank you for your work. And to the disabled folks watching, let's make sure to give them a chance to be good allies. Also, let's remember that being disabled doesn't make you an accessibility expert necessarily. Being disabled makes you an expert on your own experience of disability and accessibility. In some ways, being disabled makes you the super expert on your own experience, and your voice is very important for that. But unless you make an effort to learn about other aspects of accessibility, you can't be an expert. Unless you work hard at it, you can't be an expert. And I'm going to plug in my podcast here, the Accessibility Soundbite, because I want disabled people to share the barriers they experience on the web for all of us to learn, for all the champions out there to pay attention to all the little things that even the experts can't be expected to know. I often repeat the motto, nothing about us without us. Don't enact accessibility without talking to disabled people. There's a related saying that is also very important. Do it with us, not for us. If you implement accessibility for disabled people, you're likely approaching accessibility from a perspective of either charity or legal compliance. And that's not the frame of mind you want. It's also not the frame of mind you have when your organization or your project has a culture of accessibility. And I'm coming short on time, so I'm going to skip a couple things that I invite you to look at later. I'm going to reach my conclusion. Yeah, I think I can do that. I'm going to say, together we can make change happen. Disabled folks, experts, champions, designers, developers, stakeholders. We really can make change. Okay, so I've been accused of being naive by some people. I've been told by other people that I'm optimistic. And I've banged my head against a brick wall a time or three. I've gotten frustrated, I've gotten burned out, you name it. Yet I still believe that together, disabled and non-disabled, experts and champions, organization leaders and line workers, project founders and community, together we can make change happen. So I'm going to leave this talk with a challenge for you. What are you going to do to move the organization forward? What is one thing, just the one thing, that you're going to do this week to move that needle? And when you've done that, what's the next smart thing you're going to do? So that's me. I invite you to reach out on Twitter later, because typically there's questions that pop into minds that you haven't really thought about until after the talk and these things have sifted. And I'm going to have a quick look at the questions that are coming through.
That was great. Thank you so much, Nick. I think we only are going to have time for one question, but we'll see how quickly we can move through them. So the first question was, someone wanted to know, how can somebody who wants to be a champion of accessibility get started? Not knowing what's important, how do you start learning enough to be effective?
That's a fantastic question. I'm going to circle back to listen to the disabled experience. Obviously, you can have trouble finding disabled people, but if you listen to my podcast, for example, it's going to be one thing that you're going to hear the experience of disability in their own words. There is the W3C.
Oh, I think that we may have lost Nick. Oh, maybe not.
Have you lost me? Am I here?
Yep, you're back now.
Okay, so I was saying my podcast and the W3C website at w3.org/WAI is a great central resource to start learning about things and where to be more effective.
I think too, just generally engaging and probably being willing to speak up, even if you don't know everything, because you made that differentiation between experts and advocates, right?
Yep.
Or champions. So one other question that might be kind of quick. The question is, those accessibility overlays shouldn't be the complete solution to an accessible website, but to be fully WCAG 2.1 AAA compliant, aren't they required?
Absolutely not. Don't even think about overlays. Overlays are not a solution. Overlays are a barrier to accessibility. Overlay providers are evil, and I don't care if they sue me. I and over 700 accessibility expert, disability experts have signed the overlay fact sheets, the statement position. It's not a good thing. No website can ever be WCAG AAA compliant. It's just not possible. It's a goal to aspire to, but it doesn't work. You can be WCAG 2.1 AA compliant, and you do not need any overlays to do that.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And we will have a talk later on about overlays and whether or not they can actually live up to their hype. So definitely tune in for that. That's about as much time as we have for questions today. Please feel free to follow up with Nick in either on Twitter, as he's mentioned here, you can see on his slides, or in the WordPress Accessibility Day Slack as well.
My Twitter handle, for those who can't read the slide, is VAVROOM. Vavroom.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So thank you, everyone, for attending this session with Nicholas Steenhout. You can continue the conversation in the chat or on social media using hashtag WPA11Y Day and hashtag WP2022. We also appreciate it if you go to wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation, and you have the option to enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. Stay tuned for a panel discussion on selling accessibility to your clients coming up next in about 10 minutes. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. We'll see you here right back after the break.